I'm fired up. I'm fired up. I'm fired up, first of all, about the things that this church is doing. I'm fired up about Focus on Youth and Senior High Fellowship. And some of the leadership of Senior High Fellowship is providing the Focus on Youth. I think it's very exciting. I'm fired up about the Sunday school, and I'm fired up about Heifer Sunday and all the good work that the money that's raised for Heifer does in the world. I'm fired up about some of the things this church is involved with through the mission team, helping New Life, having people who are homeless and getting their first home to have furniture. I'm fired up about the money we've helped for Flying Kites in Kenya, where we take the poorest of the poor, orphans, and help train them so that they can be educated and have a life and a future and a hope. I'm fired up about the money that we're giving to help those who have suffered through the hurricanes. I'm fired up about many of the other things that this church is doing through the mission team. We're having an impact in the world, a big impact in the world. And that I find very, very excited. I'm fired up about Soup to Go, that we're doing things in the Boston area to help the homeless. I'm fired up about the knitting group that's just started to help people, mostly our women. I don't think men are excluded, are they, Susan? You probably don't have any in there yet, but that are offering service and doing meaningful things for people, both for those who are knitting and the prayer shawls and the prayer, what do you call them, the prayer, the what? The prayer squares that they're doing to give to people who are grieving or suffering. And there are many other things I'm really fired up about in this church, but we're doing a lot of very important, powerful things that I think bring honor to Jesus and bring healing in the world. But I'm not only fired up about that, I'm fired up about the Growing Young initiative that you've heard about. There were 8 of us that just returned on the red eye on Friday night from Pasadena, California. We went to a 2-day conference, and it was a great conference. I'm just really fired up about some of the things that we've learned through that conference, and I'm fired up about what I believe God is going to do through that in our midst. And I'm really fired up about stewardship, and I'm fired up about our theme, which is Fired Up, Giving That Matters. I'm fired up about that theme. I think it's a great theme. I'm fired up about the team that developed it. And I'm fired up because I think God is going to be working in your hearts and the hearts and lives of our church to fire us up so that we will give more generously, far more generously than we've ever done before. And I'm fired up because I am really excited to see what God is going to do through this. So you got the message. I'm fired up, right? Okay, I didn't want anyone to miss that. I want to turn to the scriptures just briefly. There are 3 scriptures that we have from the Old Testament, from the book of Acts, and from the book of the Gospel of Luke about people being fired up. Now, in Psalm 63 is one of my favorite Psalms. It doesn't use the metaphor of being fired up. It's using the metaphor of thirst. But you easily could switch it, where the psalmist says, "Oh God, you're my God. I thirst for you. My soul hungers for you. I'm thirsting for you like a person in a dry land, and I really need you." You could easily transform that to I'm on fire for you, oh God. I'm being consumed by my love and my passion for you. If you want to ever read a good psalm, just read Psalm 63. It's a passionate psalm. The psalmist is just demonstrating his love for God. And I would recommend that psalm. And then the second passage is from the Acts chapter 18. It's just a little story about the encounter of the disciples with Apollos. Now, we don't know anything about Apollos. He was a Jew from Alexandria, and all of a sudden, he shows up in Ephesus, where Paul and some of his followers are. he had become a follower of Jesus. We don't know any of the details. None of the details are in the scriptures about this. But he was a very well-spoken person. Some scholars think that he may have actually been the author of the book of Hebrews. But he shows up. He's very eloquent. He's a powerful preacher. He just needs a little bit more information, a little bit more knowledge. He hasn't got the complete story on Jesus. And so they take him aside. Some of the disciples take him aside. They instruct him. But it says he preached with burning enthusiasm. Apollos was passionate. He didn't grow up with the other disciples in Jerusalem and Judea. We don't know the story, as I mentioned, but he is a follower of Jesus now, and he's passionate, and he's going through the Mediterranean world, and he's sharing his faith, and he's doing it powerfully. And when he encounters kind of the official disciples, they basically just instruct him a little bit and bless him, and he goes off. And he shows up every once in a while in the New Testament, but a man who is passionate, who is burning with enthusiasm, and he's having a powerful impact on those that listen to him, on those that hear him. And then the last passage is found in Luke 24. The full story is after Jesus' resurrection. This story is called The Road to Emmaus. And so after their two disciples going to Emmaus, all of a sudden Jesus comes alongside. They don't recognize him, and he's a conversation partner, and they're just basically telling him how distraught they are. They thought this guy named Jesus was going to be the Messiah, and now he's killed. And so Jesus just goes into the scriptures and starts showing indeed how this is the way it's supposed to be. And when it comes night, they actually want him to continue with them. They invite him for dinner, and then as they eat and as he breaks the bread, suddenly, the scriptures say, their eyes were opened, and they realized it was the risen Jesus that they had just encountered. And immediately after that, the scriptures tell us that Jesus vanished. He disappeared. Immediately after that happens, they say to one another, as they're kind of like trying to get their minds wrapped around this, but one of the things they say is, weren't our hearts burning within us as he was opening the scriptures? Were not our hearts burning within us? And so they don't complete their journey to Emmaus. They turn around, they head back to Jerusalem. They find the other disciples, and they're so excited. They tell their story. The other disciples hear their story, and they share their story with these two disciples. People are on fire, and we know then on the day of Pentecost and after Pentecost, they all were sent out into the world. And through this ministry, through the power of the Holy Spirit, and people whose hearts were on fire, they turned the world upside down. They turned the world upside down. And so I want us to consider what burning hearts on fire with God might really motivate us, might really help us accomplish as we look forward into the coming year, the coming years. The first thing I would like to do is just share a little bit of what we learned about from the Growing Young cohort. By the way, there was 8 of us. Does anyone know what a cohort is? A cohort basically means a group. It could be a like-minded group. It was actually a division of the Roman army, but we are not part of the Roman army, so that doesn't actually apply to us. But there were 8 of us. There were myself, Pastor Karen, Arturo, Liz Lysiandra, Tim O'Loughlin, Jen Carlson, I'm blanking. Oh, Emily Ott, and who else did I leave? And Wendy Ludwig. So there are 8 of us that went to this conference out in Pasadena, California at Fuller Seminary, and it's for the Fuller Youth Institute. And everything there is first rate. I have to tell you, the seminars were first rate, the things we learned that were excellent and very challenging. And I wanted to share, there's really too much to share with you, but I want to share just a couple things or a few things that were highlights for me and I think for us as a team. The first thing, that first evening, or the first morning I should say, that day, one of the facts that we learned is there's no denomination in the United States that is growing. Okay? There's no denomination in the United States that's growing. Okay? Some are stable, but none are growing. Most are declining, some declining fairly rapidly. And for me, you know, at the end we all shared what was our biggest takeaway. The biggest takeaway, or the thing that stuck out to me from this conference, is this phrase: the church is calibrated to reach a world that no longer exists. Let me say that again. The church is calibrated to reach a world that no longer exists. And let me unpack that just a little bit. So those of us that are my age, or baby boomers, probably this includes even Generation Xers, the world is so different in terms of just the normal kind of progress. When I was a young man, I mean, you graduated from high school, you either got a job, you went to work, then you got married, then you had children, you get a house. There's this kind of normal expectation. It just absolutely is not the case now. They showed a diagram of what it's like for millennials, and they have that kind of, on the background, they have the line that I just mentioned, but then there's all kinds of, it's just not the same. It's absolutely not the same. So when we go to a millennial or something happens and we think, well, why can't you get a job? When I was your age, I did this, and I did this, and I did this. Well, the problem with that is the world's really different. The world is different now for them than it was for many of us when we were their age. And so what happens is the church frequently is slow to respond. I mean, I just think that's human nature. But so we have a church that is addressing a world, is trying to reach a world, calibrating itself for a world that doesn't exist. Action then is to kind of bear down and try to do a little bit harder what's always worked in the past. If I do this just a little harder, if I hire this person, or we do this program, or we do this. So I want you to think about that phrase. The church is calibrated for a world that no longer exists. That just is rattling around in my brain. I'm going over and over that. Another thing, I think very important thing that we learned was leadership begins with listening. Listening is so important. And I preach a series of sermons on listening. We're not talking about just hearing. We're talking about listening and really giving people permission to speak. Listening, like asking questions. What's the story of this church? And you will be hearing some of us. We're going to start trying to do a better job at listening. We're going to try to be meeting with people, just having coffee. What's the story of the church? What called you to the church? Or what attracted you to the church, and what keeps you here? What do you find important and meaningful about the church? And so you can't address the world if you're not listening. And we can do a much better job at listening from myself all the way throughout. We can be much better listeners and not be afraid to hear what the answers are. We need to create an environment where people can speak their truth, even if it cuts across the grain. Let me tell you a story. This is one story that stands out in my mind. So the way this was organized, there are, I can't remember how many churches. There must have been, I don't know, 25, 30 churches represented, and there were like 5 or 6 coaches. Each coach has 4 or 5 churches. So we met with our coach for one discussion session. 8 of us. And so I think we had just had this session on listening, and so his name is Keegan Lenker. So Keegan, asked us what we've heard, and then we had we call him our trophy millennial. They really wanted millennials to be in the group, and we didn't have any until, thankfully, Emily Ott is really, actually, she's very passionate and on fire. So Emily then was part of our group. So she got put on the spot a lot, I have to tell you. So we're sitting at the table, and then Keegan looks at Emily and he says, "Okay, Emily, can you share anything, any burden on your heart that maybe you would really like to say but haven't had an opportunity to say it?" And she, with great composure, she thought a minute, and then she shared and also about preaching at the church, which would actually affect me since I do most of the preaching of the church. So let's say it was constructive criticism at the church. And so, it was great. She just spoke her mind, and then we talked about that on the ride to the airport. I sat next to her, and we talked about my sermons and, things that, she likes, things she doesn't, or what people her age like. But it was a great opportunity to really listen. And sometimes the things we hear when we listen aren't necessarily things we want to hear. I wanted to hear, say, "Phil, your sermons are so great. I really love them." And let's just say that that's not what she said, okay? So listening is so important, and it's leadership, but it's all the way around. We need to learn to listen. Another thing that we learned is focusing on when we focus on youth and their families, everyone grows. All generations grow. It's not just them. When we focus on youth and their families, everyone rises. The church rises. So it's not an either or. It's not a zero-sum game, because I think a lot of us have this implicit fear that if we focus on one group, we only have so much. If we focus on one group, then someone's going to be taken away. If we focus on the youth, then we're going to forget about the elderly. If we focus on this, we're going to miss that. Okay, and the point is, when we do this well, when we listen well, and we do this well, everybody grows. Everybody rises. And the last thing I think I would share from this piece is that growing young and kind of recalibrating ourselves is not about focusing. It's not just about youth ministry or thinking about youth ministry or even young adult ministry or children's ministry. It's really a culture change. It's a different way of thinking. It's not just an add-on, we need to do this, or we need to focus on this little group, and that's it. It really involves a culture change. And so there were many other things that we learned. Those, for me, were some of the most powerful, and I love that story, that when Keegan asked Emily, and Emily, she didn't shy away, and she spoke her mind. It was so helpful. So it took us to go out to California for her to feel like she could actually, say what she thought. Now I want to switch gears to stewardship, because I think this all ties together. I'm fired up about stewardship as well, because when we're fired up, when we're passionate about what we do, the money follows, right? Take me for an example. Someone gave my wife a horse. You know this. Do you know the story? Someone gave my wife a free horse. Any of you have boats? That's like a free boat. We have a free horse, and all I could see is month after month was spending money on the room and board for the horse. And I'm thinking, can we get rid of this free horse that's so free that it's kind of got like a hole in our checkbook account? So, but she nagged me and begged me, and finally I started riding, and then I fell in love about riding. You probably have guessed that. And so horses are expensive, and we use money. Because I'm passionate about horseback riding, the money's there to do it. We use money so that we can go to these places, we can, we have to get all the tack and all of that stuff. But the point is, I'm passionate about it, and what we're passionate about, we spend our money on, right? Our money follows our passion. I read recently, when you open your wallet, that's making a theological statement. Your budget is making a theological statement. And so I'm fired up because I think this congregation is going to be fired up. I think you're going to be fired up. I think that you're going to really not be put off by the challenge. The challenges that we face, the world has changed. That's a really big obstacle on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity for us to recalibrate and to make Jesus and the Word relevant. I don't even like that word, to make the Word winsome, and so that we really do minister in a way that's powerful and meaningful and change people's lives. And it takes money to do that, folks. I'm fired up about Elizabeth's story. Elizabeth's story is about a church that's passionate about Jesus, who nurtured her and formed in her faith as she grew, and then as she's gone out on mission, it's had a transforming power in her. This next year, she's taking a gap year to do this, and that's because of us, in part. It's the work of the Holy Spirit, but she grew up in this congregation. She has been held by us, and she's been turned on fire because of us. That fires me up. And we've heard after the mission trip this summer, some of those youth that came back and shared their faith. We're in all this. We're all in this all together. And God, I believe, wants to do great and powerful things through us. And I think we have the resources that we can raise the funds, that we don't have to always be thinking of scarcity and we can't do this, but we can blow away our mission budget and we can double that. Think of the healing that we can bring. Think of the way we can affect young people's lives, millennials' lives. I'm fired up. Can you tell? And so my hope and my prayer is that just like Apollos, whose heart was burning with enthusiasm, just like the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, who when they recognized Jesus and then he vanished, said, weren't our hearts burning within us? They came back and they became